There's a house you might miss if you passed too quickly. It doesn't raise its hand to be noticed. Doesn't shine, or shout, or rustle its shingles for attention. It simply waits, nestled between windblown birches, its roof bowed slightly like it remembers too much rain. If you were to look, really look, you might see something in the upstairs window. A flicker, a glint on glass. Not from within, not a lamp, it's the moon, and in that light, clearer than anything in the room behind it, a cat. Still as fallen snow, watching the night like it holds a secret meant only for her. Not a twitch, not a movement, save the tiniest flick of her tail when cloud shadows drift across her eyes. She waits, and she watches, and sometimes, only sometimes, she moves. But never randomly, never with the chaos of an ordinary cat. She moves only when the moon does. Follow the line of silver on the floorboards and you will find her. Turning corners in silence, slipping across spills of pale light that stretch beneath doors. As if the moon has laid its path, and she is the one who knows how to read it. They say she's done this for years. Always beginning in the same window. The night pulling long across the yard. The stars quick to scatter. None of the neighbors have ever heard her meow. None have caught her by surprise. Some say she's a ghost. Others, a dream tied loosely to fur. But there's something else. Something no one talks about. And it's not just in the way she follows the moonlight. It's in the way the moon seems to look back. As if the two are waiting for one another. As if there's something they remember. Long ago, before the girl with the quiet voice came to stay. Before the house leaned deeper into itself. Before silence began to mean something heavier than peace. That's when the story began again. The cat in the window. The moon on the floor. And the girl who didn't speak, not anymore. It begins, as most true things do, on a night stitched together with wind and memory. And a single light, faint, blue around the edges, flickering behind old curtains, as if even the house were holding its breath. The house sits at the edge of the woods, where the trees bend more than they should and the wind seems to forget how to stop. Its paint has peeled into curls like old ribbon, and the windows always seem caught between sighing and sleeping. Sometimes moss creeps up the bricks as if trying to tuck the whole place in. And always, above the porch, a blue lantern glows. Not electric, not fire. It's a soft light, somehow both tired and gentle, like it's trying not to wake the night. This is where Elsie comes to stay. She arrives holding nothing but a canvas bag in silence. The car that drops her off doesn't linger. And she doesn't wave when it leaves. Her shoes crunch on gravel, but her footsteps barely speak. Elsie is 8 years old and hasn't spoken since the funeral. She doesn't plan to now. Grandfather opens the door like it's heavier than it used to be. He doesn't wear the right shoes for winter. Just soft slippers and a coat with elbows rubbed thin. He nods once, like that's enough of a hello, and lets her in. The door closes behind her with the sound of something beginning. Inside, the house smells of old tea and time. Every hallway remembers footsteps. Every window remembers faces. The furniture looks as though it has stayed still out of respect, waiting for quiet to lift. Grandfather offers her the room with the dormer window. The one that watches the path between the birches, and at night, catches the moon like a coin in a bowl. He says little, just places his palm on her shoulder, thick and warm, as if his hands still know how to speak. There is no music, no television, only the soft ping of the baseboard heater and the hum of something just outside the edge of words. At night, the house seems to breathe differently, as if remembering how to settle once more. She hears the wind before she hears the cat. A brush, maybe. A thump. Not quite footsteps. Not quite nothing. In the dark, Through the frost-glazed glass of her bedroom, she sees it. Not a shadow. Not yet. A shape. Low and still, sitting perfectly behind the gate that curls at the front yard's edge. A weathered stretch of iron, half swallowed by vines even in winter. And behind it, two eyes, round as dark lanterns, staring up. The cat is gray. She has a white stripe down her nose, narrow as a brushstroke. She doesn't blink, doesn't move, only watches, not the house, but the moon. Head tilted just slightly, like she's listening to it whisper. Elsie doesn't speak, only rests her cheek against the windowpane, watching from behind the curtain. She thinks the cat might look back. In the morning, there are faint prints at the edge of the frost. Small paws, perfectly spaced. No other tracks. No mess. Only a tail drag across the lowest stair, like a ribbon forgotten in snow. When Elsie sits on the porch swing that afternoon, the cat returns. Doesn't approach. Doesn't beg. Just curls by the gate again, utterly still. Eyes closed, like she's dreaming something only cats remember. Grandfather steps out just once to refill his pipe. He glances at the cat, then at Elsie. Says nothing about either of them. As he turns to go back inside, he murmurs, more to himself than either of them. That's Minna. She's been here longer than I have. Never meows. Never leaves when the moon's out. Elsie waits until he's gone. Says nothing, even then. But for a single moment. She thinks Minna hears her silence. And understands. Minna doesn't behave like other cats. Elsie notices this on the third night, when sleep refuses to find her and the moon draws long shapes across the rug. Her eyes, heavy but curious, track a sliver of light stretching down the hallway, and in it, a cat. Gray and whisper quiet, Minna pads forward like she is walking along a thread spun from silver. Her feet never touch darkness. Only the moon. She pauses at corners, tests the edges of shadow, then slips soundlessly into the next soft pool of light. Elsie holds her breath, watching. It isn't random. Minna isn't simply wandering. She's following something. Or maybe, retracing. As though the moonlight knows where to go, and she is the only one who remembers how to follow. The next night, Elsie waits for her. She doesn't sleep. Doesn't turn on the lamp. Just sits with her knees hugged to her chest and eyes open wide. Minna comes again, this time starting from the back kitchen door. Pale blue light spills across the floor from a small window, and Elsie sees her step right into it. Like stepping onto a path only she can see. Elsie tiptoes after her, through the hallway, past the baseboard heater that hums low like a lullaby. Around the corner where the wallpaper peels. Her toes touch the light where Minna's paws just were, and for a moment, she imagines something tugging at her chest, gentle and slow. Minna stops outside a closed bedroom door. She doesn't scratch. Just sits. The beam of moonlight cuts straight to her back like a soft spotlight. She doesn't look at Elsie, but Elsie feels something pass between them anyway. A knowing. Like Minna is remembering her too. After that, Elsie begins to wait for the moon. She learns where it appears first, on the edge of the window seat near the books left untouched, then crawling across the corridor by midnight. Minna always finds it. As soon as the house settles and grandfather's chair stops creaking downstairs, Minna begins her slow, deliberate walk. Elsie follows, careful not to step anywhere the moon doesn't touch. She imagines it a kind of rule. A spell. The light on the carpet. The shine over polished tiles. Even the edge of the doorway that glows, faint and flickering. All of them become a trail. And Minna, the trailkeeper. Outside, the wind rubs its fingers through the birches. Inside, the only sound is Elsie's breath, and the soft, rhythmic pad of paws that never miss the light. One night, later, perhaps closer to spring, Elsie opens her bedroom door and finds Minna already sitting beneath the window. Not looking out, but in. She's watching the floor, the sliver of moonlight reaching across the rug. Her tail flicks once. Waiting. Elsie steps next to her, feet bare and careful. The light cradles their shadows like a secret. "I won't say anything," she whispers. "I promise." Minna doesn't move, only blinks, and begins walking toward the next patch of moonlight. Elsie follows. It begins with footsteps, not from above, not below, but from within. Soft, shuffling prints that seem to hush the hallway as they pass. Elsie notes them, night after night, the way some children count stars or stitches. Light falls like lace across the floorboards. And Minna steps into it exactly. There's method in her movement. Not the erratic dash of curiosity, not the lounging grace of feline ease. This is something else. Ritual, maybe. Minna's paws find the light as if it were scent. Always at night. Always when the moon is bright enough to cast itself like a question. Sometimes Elsie walks behind her, mirroring every press of paw with her own heel. Quietly, carefully, like she, too, is part of something sacred. The silver shapes on the floor stretch and shift. Doorways, tiles, the rug near the cold fireplace. Each one visited in turn. It feels like a code. Elsie begins to sketch them in the margins of old newspapers she finds in the kitchen drawer. Moonlit squares, glowing ellipses, rectangles with rounded edges or sharp corners where light slips through torn curtains. She names them in her head. Arch, spill, shoal, shimmer. Minna knows the language. Elsie tries to learn it. Grandfather watches sometimes from his chair, cup of tea cooling beside him. He doesn't ask questions, just watches as his granddaughter tiptoes across lit planks with her arms out for balance. As the cat leads, wordless and poised. He doesn't call it odd. Doesn't call it anything. One night, after the third or fourth shared moonwalk, he speaks. Not much. Just a murmur into the room as Elsie passes by barefoot. "That cat's lived here longer than any of us," he says. "She came the winter your mama was born." Something shifts in Elsie. A breath at the bottom of her lungs she didn't know she was holding. She lowers herself to the floor beneath the kitchen table and sits in a patch of light where Minna dozes. That night, she dreams of voices wrapped in snow. But even in dreaming, she can't remember their words. She thinks about time. How nobody talks about the years, not really. Only the seasons. Winter again, they say. Or just spring still. Nobody says. It's been 39 years since a striped cat first sat on this same threshold. Elsie finds herself waiting outside more, where the moon paints fences and the twigs make shadows like script. One evening, she runs her fingers across the porch wood where Minna pauses nightly. It's smooth there, worn like a page turned too many times. Grandfather says nothing when dinner is uneaten, but the chair beside the window is warm. He doesn't ask why Elsie stops placing her slippers beneath the bed, but instead near the door. A small offering, maybe, to the path between rooms. Minna, always silent, begins to seem more solid. Not heavier, just more present. Like shadows no depart for her. Like the light keeps shape around her paws. Elsie begins to whisper before she follows. Little words. Not quite speech. Just breath with intention. Names of bright shapes. Little descriptions. A thank you under her breath. The cat never glances back. But sometimes, her ears shift. And once, in the corridor where the moon falls exactly across a curling corner of rug, Minna stops. Presses her nose gently to the light. and looks straight into Elsie's eyes. No sound. Just the two of them, outlined in silver. And the faint rhythm of the house remembering. One afternoon, when the house is half lit and quiet, Elsie finds an old drawer she's never noticed before. It's in the sewing room, a small space with yellowed curtains and a table too crowded with threads. The drawer sticks a little when she pulls it open, as if whatever's inside has been holding its breath. Inside, lace that's unraveled into curls, buttons the colors of dried fruit, a thimble with a dent near the rim. Beneath them all, nearly hidden, a photograph, curled at the edges and faded soft. Elsie's breath catches. The girl in the picture can't be older than 5. Her smile is crooked. Her hair is wild and windblown and unmistakably the same brown as Elsie's. The kitten in her arms is even more familiar. Gray fur. A white stripe down her nose. Delicate paws. Her eyes, though blurry in the image, are bright with that same quiet knowing. It's Minna. Elsie studies the photograph for a long time, fingertips pressed so gently to its corner that she feels the paper's softness more than its edge. If that is her mother in the picture, if this cat was hers, too, then how is Minna still here? She sets the image beside her on the dusty window seat. Outside, birch branches tap politely at the glass. She thinks about grandfather's voice when he said, "She came the winter your mama was born." Maybe he meant another cat. Maybe there were many, all with that same stripe, passed down like a family secret. But something inside her doesn't believe that. That night, Minna curls closer to Elsie's feet than usual, not touching, just near. Close enough to feel the warmth in the shape of sleep. The moonlight touches both of them, a thin halo of silver that bends across Elsie's blanket and rests on Minna's fur like it belongs there. The photo stays beside her pillow for days. She doesn't ask grandfather about it. Not yet. Instead, she begins visiting the sewing room again. Searching. Not for more photos, there are none, but for clues. A button that might have sewn onto a coat her mother once wore. A spool of thread that still smells faintly like chamomile. Behind one of the shelves, she finds a snow globe. Cracked. The liquid inside is mostly gone, but a fleck of glitter still floats when she tilts it. It shows a tiny cabin in winter, no bigger than a thimble. And in front of it, the painted outline of a cat. Gray, with a white stripe. Elsie doesn't know if it's coincidence. But it doesn't feel like one. Some things are too quiet to be explained. That night, for the first time, Minna doesn't wait in the hallway. She leaps softly onto Elsie's bed, not to curl, not to sleep, just to sit beside her. Their faces in the moonlight. Elsie doesn't speak, only holds the photo against her chest. And listens to the house remember, all around them. The night folds in around the house like a second skin, thicker, quieter than usual. Outside, the birch limbs sway but do not creak, as if even they are listening. Inside, the stove ticks down from its warmth, and the old light above the sink blinks once, then settles. Elsie can't sleep, not from restlessness, but from something else, something soft and knotted. She lifts the photograph from her bedside. It's almost habit now, pressing her thumb to the blurry edge of Minna's fur. The places where the time has faded her mother's face to just a smile and the shape of a story. Downstairs, the stairs groan. Just once. Not a step. Just the sound of something remembering wait. She waits a minute. Then 3. Then she slides from her bed, the floor cool beneath her toes. Her fingers trail the wall as she treads down the hallway, more by knowing than sight. In the sitting room, the fire has gone out. But grandfather is there, not sitting, just standing, still, near the hearth. In his hand, not a book, not a pipe, but a small blanket, folded once, as though he forgot where it was meant to go. He doesn't turn when Elsie steps in. But his voice comes low, like a whisper meant for woodgrain. She always knew, he says. It's the first time she's heard his voice that close to breaking. Not cracked, exactly, frayed. Elsie says nothing, just waits, one hand resting on the back of the chair that still smells faintly of cedar and tea. I didn't believe it myself at first, he says again. Thought it was timing, coincidence, cat habits, all that. He turns halfway now, eyes not quite finding hers. But she knew when your mama was born. Waited by the stairs the week leading up to it, just sat there like she was listening to something underground. Elsie steps forward, slowly. He keeps talking. When your mother got sick, Minna disappeared. Gone. 2 weeks. Vanished like mist. His hand brushes the edge of the mantle. She came back the evening your mother passed, he says. Walked to her room. Curled by the bed. Laid there all night. There's silence now. Not awkward. Not strained. Just full. He doesn't cry loudly. Only tightens once in the shoulders, then sinks to the chair like it helped him down. Elsie kneels by his side. Doesn't take his hand, but rests lightly against his knee. She sleeps in your room now, he says softly. I notice. Elsie nods once. Never liked to be shut in. But now, she waits. A few moments pass. He closes his eyes. She always knows, he repeats. And this time, the crack is there, right down the center. Elsie stays with him until his breathing softens, evening out. His hand hangs lazily by the side of the chair, brushed by shadows. She stands, lightly as a leaf, and climbs the stairs back to her room. When she opens her door, Minna is already in the patch of moonlight near the end of the bed. Not asleep, just resting. Elsie climbs in without a word and watches the shadows move softly across the ceiling. She doesn't need to speak. The house has already said enough tonight. And the cat, as always, says nothing. But Elsie feels it, beneath the quiet, beside the hush of the walls and the windows and the wind. The shape of knowing, the outline of goodbye, and something like love, still awake, curled in the dark. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept into the corners, melting ice that clung stubbornly to the eaves, coaxing stubborn green from the sides of ditches, letting birds remember songs they hadn't needed for months. The wind stayed, but it softened. And so did everything else. The house was quieter in its shifting. The walls no longer settled with winter's weight, and the floorboards warmed just enough that Elsie stopped curling her toes when she stepped out of bed. She spoke again for the first time on an afternoon when Minna sat pressed against the porch boards, eyes half closed in a spill of delicate sunlight. Not a long sentence. Not even a proper one. Just 4 whisper-soft words. I see it too. She wasn't sure what she meant. Only that it felt true. Minna didn't react, but her tail flicked once, just enough to say, I heard you. From then on, Elsie spoke in pieces. To herself. To the house. To Minna most of all. She'd point to the way the clouds bent, or how the light caught in the chipped corners of the windows, and say quietly, it looks like lace, or, that patch is shaped like a wing, and Minna would only listen. She never wandered far, didn't stray for hours like before. She kept to the porch, the back hallway, the window ledge in Elsie's room. She watched the moon, still, only now with more stillness than motion. Sometimes she'd walk her quiet paths again, but always slower, more thoughtful. Perhaps even reluctant. One morning, as the lilac buds fattened and the sky took on its summer blue, Minna meowed. Just once. Elsie had almost forgotten the sound a cat makes when it wants the world to notice it. It was low, drawn out, not asking, just saying. 2 nights later, she meowed again. 3 times, each one deliberate, each pause between them its own sentence. Elsie followed her through the house that night. Through soft rectangles of light and into darker spaces where moonlight hadn't reached yet. Minna walked steadily, tail held half-mast. At the back door, she stopped. Looked out into the darkness. Then turned her head, not looking at Elsie, but toward her. And left, quiet as she always was, but this time without waiting. Without that final glance to the next patch of light. The door had been left ajar for the night air. By morning, she hadn't returned. Elsie checked everywhere. Behind the garden shed. Beneath the porch swing. In the hollow beside the roots of the birch tree, where Minna sometimes dipped her nose to drink when it rained. Nothing. Grandfather clanged her dish that evening, as he always did at dusk. The sound echoed longer than usual. Hollow. The biscuits in her bowl stayed untouched. That night, Elsie taped a cutout of the full moon to her window. Round and pale, drawn with leftover chalk and the stub of a blue-colored pencil. She sat cross-legged by the door, watching the yard until her eyes closed. Days passed, then weeks. The house buzzed differently now. Sharper in some places, duller in others. Elsie laid her head on the windowsill, waiting for a paw she could no longer hear. The light felt colder without Minna walking in it. Sometimes she thought she saw her. The curl of a shadow beside the fence. The flick in the corner of her vision when a curtain moved. But each time she looked closer, the path was empty. Summer arrived early. Thunderstorms carved their names into the horizon, and the house smelled briefly of wet leaves and long evenings. Then, one soft night, Elsie heard a rustle on the porch. A shape, too small for wind, too sure to be imagined. She opened the door with breath held tight, pulse in her ears. No cat waited on the step. But one small paw print, pressed into dust, glimmered silver beneath the moon. And just inside, at the foot of the attic stairs, light, pale as memory, laying itself on the floor, like a path being redrawn. The attic door sticks. It always has. Elsie tugs gently, careful not to wake the house with its groan. The wood yields slowly, reluctant, and the scent of old dust comes tumbling down the stairs like breath held too long. She waits on the bottom step. Listens. The boards sigh above her, but not heavily. Just once. Like someone shifting their weight before standing. Like memory lifting its head. She climbs. The light is clearer up here. Thinner, too. Like it traveled a long way to reach this place and didn't bring too much of itself. A narrow beam comes through the single window like a thread pulled loose from the sky. It lays itself across the attic floor in a soft stripe. Minna is there, exactly where the light falls. Curled into a quiet approximation of a question mark. Her fur looks more gray than silver in this light, but her stripe gleams pale across her nose. She doesn't lift her head. Doesn't blink this time, but she breathes. Elsie steps forward, one bare foot at a time, and lowers herself to the floor beside her. The wooden planks are cold, but she doesn't mind. For a moment, neither moves. Then, Minna makes a sound. Not a meow. Something smaller, deeper. A hum without tune, a sigh that's learned patience. It lasts only a second, but it curls into the stillness like smoke. Elsie doesn't answer, but she leans just an inch closer. The two of them sit like that for a long time. The moonlight thins further, almost brittle now, like paper held up to a flame. Not burning, just ready to let light pass through. Elsie thinks, for a moment, she hears the wind telling a story to the birch trees. She closes her eyes. They sleep. When Elsie wakes, it's morning. pale and gray through the attic glass. The dust has settled again. The beam of light has faded away, tucked somewhere behind clouds and day. Minna is still beside her. Still quiet. Still real. Elsie strokes one careful finger along her back, as if to be sure. Minna flicks her ear. And that's enough. They rise together, slow and soft. They leave the attic like a place remembered. Like a chapter folded closed but never forgotten. The paw print at the bottom of the stairs has vanished. But Elsie doesn't need it anymore. Autumn arrived like a yawn, slow, stretching, draping gold along the edges of trees and softening the shape of the days. The skies dulled to pewter. The leaves began to let go without apology. And inside the house, something settled. Elsie spoke more easily now. Not often, and never loudly, but her words came without the weight they used to carry. She wrote too. Little things. Words folded into corners of drawings. Bits of stories she wasn't sure how to finish. Descriptions of the way Minna looked when the moon touched her. Stitched together from dusk and stillness, one said. Like memory with a heartbeat, another. Minna stayed close, quiet still. But something subtle had shifted. She did not walk her paths anymore. She moved, yes, but gently, without direction, as if the route no longer needed remembering. One morning, grandfather decided to fix the floorboards in the attic. A task postponed for seasons. Second steps would always catch and groan. The corner near the west beam had begun to dip. Elsie offered to help, though help meant mostly handing him tools and naming the spiders they uncovered beneath the wood. When he pried up the worst board, a small envelope slipped out. Not pristine. Edges yellowed. Ribbon tied, but loosely now, the knot barely holding. Grandfather paused when he saw it. Pressed his thumb against its corner. Then passed it to Elsie without opening it. She waited until evening to untie the ribbon. Inside, letters. Dozens. Some folded twice. Others crimped at the edges as though worried by fingertips. All written in the same careful script she did not recognize but wanted to. At the top of the first, "My dearest home." She inhaled. It was her mother's handwriting. Almost every page mentioned Minna. "She waits for me each night at the top of the stairs," one said. "I think she knows when I miss you most." Another. "When I cry, she finds me before I can hide. She just sits there, heavy with importance. Like she's delivering a message I don't have permission to read." Elsie didn't finish them all that night. But one near the bottom stilled her breath. "I think Minna is the moon's cat," her mother wrote. "Maybe not always. Maybe just when no one else is looking." That night, Elsie brought the letters to bed with her. She didn't read, just rested them nearby, beside the spot Minna had begun to claim more often than not. The room was quiet, but not silent. Outside, the trees rustled like pages. The wind moved low against the eaves. And moonlight spilled like a question across the wooden floor. Minna opened her eyes. And blinked once. In winter, light finds its way in quietly. Through seams in the curtains. Through the tilt of the porch roof. Through the spaces where windows forget to seal. Elsie notices it more now, how it pools, how it shifts, how it carries the weight of time without speaking it aloud. Minna watches too, but not like before. She doesn't follow it anymore. Doesn't chase the pale shapes that drift along the floor. She rests instead, curled beneath Elsie's chair, her tail flicking once every hour like the tick of a slow, old clock. Elsie draws her often now, in pencil and ink and the stub of a wax crayon so worn it no longer has a name. She sketches the line of Minna's back, the soft shape of her tail, the stripe that still catches moonlight even when the lamp is off. One night, snow whispers against the windows, soft as sleep. Grandfather brings down a box of notebooks from the attic he hasn't opened in years. He offers them without ceremony, placing them beside Elsie's satchel on the kitchen bench. "If you're writing," he says, "you'll need a place to keep it." She doesn't smile, just nods. That's enough. Later, curled on the rug with a thermos of tea between her knees, Elsie opens the first notebook. Most pages are blank, but in the very center, a pressed flower, pale and ridged like the moon's breath, and a strip of paper not glued down, just tucked between the binding. "My name was Margaret, once," it reads, in ink faded as breath. "But they called me Maggie." Elsie runs her fingers across the page. That night, she writes her first letter. Not in a journal, not in a notebook with lines. She writes on scraps, on the backs of receipts, on the torn corner of a seed packet left from spring. She signs each one, sometimes with her name, sometimes with a drawing. A crescent moon, a little cat paw, a window. She doesn't know who she's writing to exactly, but the house seems to know. She keeps the letters in a drawer beside her bed, tucked under a folded scarf and a pencil sharpener that smells like cedar. Every few nights, she adds another. The topics are small things. What the fire sounded like. How the lilacs still haven't let go of their last leaves. How sometimes Minna jerks in her sleep like she's dreaming of running. And always, at the bottom, she thanks them. Whoever they were. The letter pile grows. Minna sleeps deeper. Outside, snow piles in hushes. Inside, the light remains soft and low, like it's listening. One full moon, Grandfather finds her at the table with pen in hand, staring out the window. "Do you talk to them?" he asks. Elsie nods. He glances once at the ceiling, then at Minna, draped across the windowsill like old velvet. "Your mama did too." Elsie doesn't answer, but she writes the next line in her letter slowly, pressing down just enough for the ink to leave a dent. "I think Minna remembers everything," she writes. "Even the parts we've forgotten to miss." Winter came differently this year. Not with storms or sudden silence, but like an echo returning, familiar, quiet, and heavy all at once. The trees forgot to shake their last leaves. The wind didn't feel sharp, only thoughtful. Even the snow seemed reluctant to fall. Inside, the house folded into itself. The rugs curled slightly at the corners. The windows softened their light. And Minna stayed. She didn't follow the moon anymore. She barely moved from her spot beside Elsie's desk chair or the folded blanket near the fireplace. Sometimes she would sit at the threshold between kitchen and hall, blinking slowly, as if tasting the memories sewn into the wallpaper. Elsie tried not to hover. But she noticed how Minna's curl was tighter, her breath slower. How the white stripe along her nose wasn't as bright. How her eyes lingered too long on certain corners of the room, as if remembering how the light used to fall there. Still, she wrote. Elsie's letters now spilled beyond the drawer. They filled envelopes she didn't seal, pages she didn't date. She didn't always sign them. Sometimes it felt like the house itself finished her sentences. And there were drawings. Minna in her many forms. Walking the moonlight's trail, staring through frost-laced glass, curled like punctuation beside a half-written poem. Elsie taped the best ones to the refrigerator door. Grandfather never said anything, but he added a small postcard one Thursday. Blank on the front, except for a faint circle drawn in pencil. A full moon. Underneath it, in tiny script, she was always watching. Meals were quieter now. Not sad. Just careful. Grandfather sipped his soup and stirred with one hand while the other reached automatically toward an empty patch of rug where Minna used to stretch. Elsie watched it happen and didn't say a word. That evening, she lit a candle without reason and wrote a letter on the back of an old takeout menu. "Do you still hear the moon?" she wrote. "Does it speak in colors now, or just in the hum of curtains moving?" She tucked it under Minna's dish. The cat didn't read it, of course. But the next morning, she moved. Slowly, purposefully, from the rug to the windowsill. She gazed outside for a long time. Elsie sat beside her. Neither of them needed the light just then. Snow had begun to gather like whispers, small and slow. Elsie placed her hand on the sill, close, never touching. "I miss the light," she said. Not to anyone. Minna didn't purr. She didn't twitch. She only blinked, lifted her head once, then rested it again. That night, the moon rose late. But its light still found them. Pale and thin and true. Minna opened one eye. Elsie didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already lived quietly between them. They watched the light stretch across the room. And they stayed there, together, long after it passed. It began long before morning. The sky was a black so deep it seemed to hold its breath. No stars. No moon. Just the low murmur of wind folding through the trees, brushing past the windows like it was sent to check on things. Elsie woke without knowing why. No dream. No sound. Only stillness. A kind she felt in her skin before her eyes were open. She sat up slowly. The air was colder than usual. The blankets clung to her like they, too, wanted her to stay. But something was waiting. She slipped from bed in silence, careful not to wake the floor. Her hands found her robe by memory. The hallway was darker than she'd ever known it. No silver spills. No faint glow from the far windows. Just shadow pressed against the door frames, thick and unmoving. Downstairs, the heater had stopped ticking. Even the house was holding its breath. At the base of the stairs, where the floor bends slightly like an old back, she saw her. Minna, still, quiet, so small in the absence of light. Her body curled just enough to look comfortable, but Elsie could tell, by the angle of her ears, the tilt of her head, this was not sleep. It was waiting. Elsie stepped closer. Minna's sides rose gently, then fell. A soft, uneven rhythm. Breathing, but thinner than it should have been. Elsie bent, scooping her carefully into her arms, surprised by how light she felt. Minna made no sound, no resistance, only shifted slightly, finding the circle of her arms the way water finds the shape of a bowl. The living room was darker than night. She pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. No sky. No silver. Not even the pale hum of distant stars. "I can't find it," she whispered. Minna pressed her forehead into the crook of her arm. Not forcefully, just there. Present. Elsie sat on the edge of the window seat, facing the long stretch of black beyond the glass. She held Minna close. They waited. Minutes stretched like mist. The dark remained unbroken. "I think it's behind the clouds," Elsie murmured. "But it's there. I know it's there." Minna didn't move. Elsie leaned her head against the windowpane, cheek against the cold. She began to hum, soft, uncertain, the tune of something her mother used to sing while folding towels. It wavered in places, like the memory didn't quite stretch all the way. Breath by breath, the house breathed with her. The radiator sighed once in the hallway. The wind nudged the porch floorboards. But the sky remained sealed. And in her arms, Minna exhaled. One long, slow breath. Elsie froze. Waited. Another breath didn't come. Minna's weight had changed. Not heavier, not lighter. Just, still. Elsie didn't speak. Didn't cry. She pressed her hand gently to Minna's back. No rise. No fall. Just the quiet. She sat there until the faintest silver thread appeared. no more than a line on the edge of the horizon. Like the moon had been watching all along, hidden behind a thick curtain, waiting for its part. Elsie didn't move. She tucked one hand over Minna's ears, as if shielding her from the dawn. And whispered, so softly even the glass didn't catch it, she waited. That was enough. She stayed at the window until the room turned gray, and the world, slow and aching, began again. The days after were strangely bright. Not in joy, no laughter came, not yet. But the air had a clarity to it, like the sky had stepped down to rest closer to the window panes. Elsie didn't cry, not loudly, not even softly, not the kind of crying that leaves traces. Instead, there was a stillness. A space where something had been. She went about her days with quiet rhythm. Stirred oatmeal at the stove. Brushed the snow off the porch swing. Fed the birds stale crusts of bread grandfather didn't notice missing. The house didn't speak much, either. Or maybe it did, but only in sighs. Creaks that sounded like footsteps that hadn't been taken. Shadows that paused a little longer before dissolving. At night, Elsie still wrote letters. Only now, she signed them with two names. Not hers and Minna's, but just two drawn shapes in the corner. A crescent moon, and a cat's eye. She placed them in the drawer beside the bed, where moonlight used to land on sleeping fur. Then dusk came, the first sliver of moon since that night. Barely there, so thin it could vanish behind a stray breath, but it was enough. Elsie stood barefoot in the hallway, holding nothing. The light touched the rug like it remembered how. She stared at it, and then, only for a moment, it moved. Not wholly, not like before, but it shimmered, just a little, like something passed through it. Something with shape, a flicker of a tail, a weightless step, and then it stilled again. Elsie exhaled, and with it came a small smile. Not big, not brave, but real. She stepped into the light. Felt its coolness bend against her skin. It didn't whisper, didn't hum, but she knew what it meant. Minna was gone, but the light remembered her. And maybe that was the same thing. Outside, the trees held their breath. Inside, Elsie tilted her head, listening. Not for paw steps, not for cries. Only for what absence made room for. And for the first time since the dark night, she whispered. Good night. Just that. No reply. But something settled in the wood beneath her feet. And the moon, rising slowly over the birches, laid its path across the floor once more. The air smelled of cedar and old rain, like the house had steeped itself in memory. A whole year had passed. The birch trees now stood bare again, limbs silvering at their edges. The porch sagged a little more heavily, as though holding its breath in the slow rhythm of seasons. But inside, everything hummed. Elsie was taller, not much, just enough for her reflection in the window to line up differently. Her voice reached further now too, still soft, but with edges that held. Some days, she spoke to friends at the small schoolhouse down the road. Other days, she spoke only to the birds. But every day, she wrote. Stacks of folded papers filled the drawer beside her bed. Letters addressed not to anyone, but to moments. To things only she could name. Minna didn't haunt the house, but she lingered. Elsie sometimes felt her in the shape of silence. In the hush before the wind moved. In the way a patch of light drifted and landed exactly where Minna's paws used to pause. The cat was gone, but her direction remained. On the anniversary of the long night, Elsie dusted the window seat. Swept each stair with an old-fashioned brush. Laid one photograph on her pillow, her mother, smiling with wild hair and a kitten in her arms. She looked at it quietly. Not searching, just remembering. After supper, grandfather brought down a small bundle, letters too, bound in worn ribbon, words Elsie hadn't read. He placed them without urgency on the table. "You can, if you'd like," was all he said. She nodded, but left them untouched, for now. As the moon rose, fatter than the night, it all changed. Elsie opened the front door, just a little. The porch lantern flickered once, as if stretching. She didn't expect company. It wasn't about that. She only stood there, tasting the cold, listening to the music of a night trying not to be forgotten. Snow lined the steps. The air smelled faintly of salt and ice. Then she heard it, one soft sound, not a meow, just pressure. Just presence. She stepped out onto the porch. Looked down into the untouched dusting of frost across the wood. There, resting beside her slipper print. A single paw print, small, neat, set perfectly in silver. No others followed. Elsie smiled, not in surprise, not in disbelief, but in greeting. She bent at the waist, touched 2 fingers to the frozen wood, right where the print rested. The cold crept into her skin, but she didn't pull away. "I missed you," she whispered. "I saved your spot." No breeze stirred, but the lantern swayed slightly. The birch limbs didn't move, yet something shifted in their shape, like their stillness had bent gently toward her. The paw print remained, fading slowly as warmth brushed its edge. Elsie didn't touch it again. She shut the door softly, like closing a letter. Then climbed the stairs, each step remembering, exactly as it had 1 year before. Some say cats see what we cannot. That they walk through the world with one paw always somewhere else, somewhere older, quieter. Elsie never asked if it was true. She never needed to. She just watched. Watched the way moonlight slipped across her floorboards every evening, even when clouds loitered overhead. Watched how it seemed to find the same corners, the same curves in the walls, like it remembered where it used to be needed. There were nights when she thought she saw it, just for a second. A flick of movement, a shift too soft for the eye, but just enough that breath caught behind her ribs. Once, late in spring, she whispered Minna's name, not expecting anything. And just as the words slipped through the dark, the wind answered with a hush that almost sounded familiar. But that was all. No weight beneath her blankets. No paw prints left in ash. Still, the house remembered. The chair that defended its patch of rug as though it were still occupied. The drawer Elsie never emptied. The shadow at dusk that stopped just shy of the window, pausing longer than the branches outside ever did. And Elsie remembered too. Not every minute, not all at once, just in the small ways that matter. She never shut her door completely. Never set the dish too far back under the cupboard. She left the windows open a little longer, even when the night grew cold. The moon came earlier now. Or perhaps she just noticed it more, how it lingered over the porch, touching the fence like a hand reaching back in time. She never told anyone. Some things are too soft for explanation. But she wrote, still. Pages and pages, folded in neat stacks beside the bed. Sometimes addressed, sometimes not, but always signed, with a curl of light. A trace of fur. A silence that meant presence. She knew the difference now. Between emptiness and space being held. Between gone and near in a way you don't need to see. One night, she woke without reason. The room was quiet, but it felt, recently full. The moon slid across the quilt in a thin ribbon. Elsie watched it, and in the silver path, a shimmer, nothing more. Just a suggestion of movement. Of weight. Of something passing through as it always had. She didn't smile. She just whispered, I know. Then turned onto her side, let the shadow wrap around her, and closed her eyes. The moonlight stayed. So did the quiet. But it was never empty again. A morning fog drapes the trees, softening their edges like a memory not quite ready to leave. Light creeps slowly across the fields, shy and pale, brushing frost from the porch with fingers too gentle to disturb. Elsie wakes to silence, not hollow, but full. The kind of quiet that wraps things up. That tucks them in. She had a dream, maybe, or something softer than a dream. A feeling, not a scene. The warmth of fur against her leg. The faint pressure of a gaze. A whisper with no words. When she opens her eyes, the moon is gone, but its trail remains. In the faint sheen on the window. In the hush of the room waiting to be noticed. She dresses slowly, chooses her softest sweater, the one with a snag on the sleeve. Grandfather hums quietly in the kitchen, the clink of a teacup punctuating the air like commas. Elsie joins him without speaking. He places one slice of toast on her plate, buttered to the edges, and nods once. A kind of ritual. After breakfast, she steps outside. The frost cracks gently beneath her boots. The birch branches stretch upward, bare and light-struck. The porch swing creaks once, just enough to say, "I remember." She stands at the gate, not to open it, but simply to stand. The air smells of pine and something old. Something kind. She kneels near the edge of the porch, brushing thin ice from the corner where a pawprint once rested. There's nothing there now, but the shape of it lives in her hands. From her coat pocket, she pulls a folded sheet of paper. Blank. Waiting. She presses pencil to page, tracing a slow arc. A moon, unfinished. A token. She writes just one line. "I remember how you moved." Folds it, slides it beneath the porch rail, where light gathers on winter mornings. The wind rises, lifts her hair. Brushes past like breath. She doesn't speak, but she smiles quietly, for no one. For the shadow circling just out of sight. Later, she returns to the sewing room. The drawer still sticks a little. Inside, the photograph waits. Her mother's smile. A kitten's wide gaze. She stares at it for a long time. Then takes an old ribbon from the drawer. Tucks it into the frame's edge. Lets it rest against the glass like a bookmark in something unfinished. Tonight, she'll leave her window open, just a little. Not entirely. Not for cold, but enough for the light to find its way in. And when it does, she'll turn toward it with eyes half closed. She won't follow. Not anymore. But she'll listen. Because the moon still moves. And some paths, once learned, never fully fade. There are some mornings that feel like a held breath, paused between seasons. The sky is a pale stretch of satin, neither bright nor blue, touched faintly by the scent of thawing earth. The kind of day that balances at the seam between winter's hush and spring's early murmur, unsure if it should open or close. Elsie senses it before her eyes are fully open, a shift, not in sound or shadow, but in quiet. The room is still, the kind of stillness not made by absence, but by presence choosing to wait. She lifts her head slowly from the pillow. Moonlight lingers on the wall, though the moon itself is long gone. It clings impossibly to the curtain's edge like a memory that refused to scatter. She doesn't move right away. There is warmth at the edge of her thoughts. Soft, old warmth. Not present. Not physical. Remembered. Downstairs, the house creaks once. A gentle reminder that the day means to begin eventually. Elsie rises, wraps herself in a blanket rather than fussing over a sweater, and pads to the window. The birches are quiet. The frost on their branches clear as glass. Across the garden, a wind shapes itself into something almost musical. She watches, long enough for color to wake slowly at the horizon's edge. Then turns. The photograph still waits on her shelf. Her mother's smile permanent now in her memory, not just paper. And the tiny kitten in her arms, a little blur of silver and stripe that no longer needs proof to be believed. Elsie taps 2 fingers lightly on the glass. A greeting not to summon, just to honor. The notebook beside it holds only one unfinished line. She doesn't add to it. But she reads it, softly. I remember how you moved. The paper doesn't reply. But she hears something in the hush that follows. Later, as she walks through the hall, the light returns for a brief flicker, stretching across the rug in that old, familiar shape. A soft spill, curved and pale. She pauses, just enough to feel it underfoot. Just long enough to close her eyes. It doesn't shift, doesn't shimmer. It simply remains, like a page left open. Elsie keeps moving. To the kitchen, where grandfather is humming low and washing the same cup twice. To the garden path where she's drawn little moons in the soil with her heel. To the porch, where the swing leans ever so slightly as if to make room. The day is long and quiet, but quietly good. When night finally arrives, she doesn't wait for the moon. She lights a single candle at her window. Leaves the curtain open, not completely, but enough. And when the beam of silver slips over the frame, she turns in without thought, letting it brush her cheek. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. Some goodbyes only sound like farewells. Some are just stories changing shape. And some, like the light that touches a cat's old path long after her steps have gone, are simply reminders that love has footprints too. Some nights drift in so quietly, they borrow your breath without asking. Tonight is one of those. The sky folds itself into soft layers of ink and velvet, and the wind weaves through the birch branches with a hush so gentle it might be mistaken for listening. Elsie sits on the windowsill, knees tucked in, cheek resting on the glass. Outside, the world is half-made, part star, part shadow. The garden is dusted in pale frost, and the porch swing rocks though no one has touched it all evening. She's stopped waiting for signs. And yet, she still notices. The moon lies low tonight. Wide and full, trailing its light slowly through each corner of the house as if retracing something it doesn't want to let go. Elsie watches its path stretch across the floor, catch the legs of her old desk, slip across the corner where the rug frays slightly, that place where Minna used to pause and press one paw into the fringe like it mattered. She doesn't speak, just breathes in. Her hand rests on the notebook in her lap, scuffed at the corners, thick with letters paced out in quiet seasons. She flips to a blank page. But doesn't write. Not right away. Instead, she closes her eyes. And listens. Not for sounds, exactly. But for what moves beneath them. For the space between the floorboard creaks. The pause where a whisper used to live. The room holds it. The kind of nearly there silence that gathers behind a cat's step. The kind you don't notice until it's gone, and even then, only because you miss the weight it held. She opens her eyes again. The moonlight has shifted, just a breath across the floor. And there, just for a flicker, she thinks she sees the light shiver. Like memory walking through it. Her fingers twitch, reaching without meaning to. She doesn't say Minna's name. She doesn't need to. She knows it would only fall softly into the bone of the house, where it already lives. Instead, she touches her pen to the page. Begins a letter with no greeting. Just the words. It was never about seeing you. It was about knowing where to look. She exhales, pauses, then writes. You taught me to follow light, not because it led somewhere, but because it reminded me something had passed that way before. She stops again. The moonlight pools quietly beside the table leg. Elsie smiles without realizing. Another line. I used to worry I'd forget your weight. The realness of you. But I don't. You pressed the world into shape around you. It still remembers the curve. She signs it with a single dot. Not a name. Just a point. An end that isn't an ending. She leaves the letter by the door. Not to be found. Not to be read. Just to be. When she slips back into bed, the light curls across the blanket like it always used to, soft and certain. She closes her eyes. Doesn't reach for it. Just lets it rest there. No promise in it. Only presence. And that is enough. The first frost of late autumn settles like a second breath across the porch railings and garden stones. Elsie wakes gently, not from a sound, but the sense of silence growing warmer. She doesn't rush to the window today. She lingers, blanket around her shoulders, toes brushing the worn floorboards that no longer creak beneath her the way they once did. This morning, the house seems to wait with her, patient. Folded. Downstairs, grandfather sips his tea, nods when she enters, and slides a plate across the table without speaking. Toast again. But today, it's cut into 2 perfect triangles. She smiles at that. After breakfast, Elsie pulls on her boots and coat, retrieving the old scarf from the hook that used to drop it. Everything fits differently now. Grown into or grown out of, but she doesn't mind. Outside, the sky is pale, the color of milk left sitting in a blue bowl. The leaves are mostly gone from the birches, their bare branches drawing soft lines in the air. She walks the edge of the house, following the places where shadow used to settle in soft cat shapes. Not looking, just walking. At the garden gate, she stops. Not because something is there, but because something always was. The frost outlines every stone, every blade of silent grass. The earth holds its breath, waiting for nothing in particular, but ready. Elsie presses one mittened hand to the gate's top rail. She closes her eyes, and remembers, not actively, not like replaying. Just remembers, the way a room remembers what it once held. She steps inside the garden. Each pace feels deliberate, not heavy. Her feet make shallow impressions in the frost, uncurling small crescents with every step. The air hums, but distantly, like the tune of an old memory fading through another room. Near the back lilac bush, the one that never bloomed quite right, there's a patch of earth that stays warmer than the rest. And there, resting without a sound, is a single feather. Gray. Long. Tipped slightly white at the edge like it's been brushed with moonlight. Elsie kneels beside it, reaches to pick it up, but stops. Not because she shouldn't, only because it feels better to let it stay. Instead, she traces a loose circle in the frost with one finger. Not big, just enough to hold quiet. Then, with both hands, she shapes a small curl beside it. A spiral. A tail. She doesn't speak. The wind shifts, just a little. And she thinks, only thinks, that somewhere, something noticed. Back inside, she removes her boots carefully, sets them beside the door without letting them clatter. She glances up the stairs, not because she needs to, but because it's still a habit. She carries the warmth of the morning with her to her desk, where her latest stack of letters leans gently against the lamp. She selects a new page. Just a blank square of paper, softened at the edges from the drawer. She writes, "You're quieter now, but I hear you in the way light settles. In the spaces behind things, where softness lives. You don't need to visit. This is still your house. I'm only here keeping it open. So the moonlight has somewhere to land." She doesn't sign it, just folds it, tucks it between 2 window panes where drafts sometimes sneak in. As the sun dips low, Elsie lights a single candle. Not for memory, not for ritual, but for warmth. The flame wavers, then steadies. And in its gentle flicker, the shadow of something familiar leans once along the wall. Then fades. Snow drifts through the night like a memory returning slowly, one flake at a time. The yard lies quiet, undisturbed, the fence tracing a soft outline in the dark. Above it all, the moon hangs low and full, bright enough to silver every branch, gentle enough not to wake them. Elsie sits on the floor beside her bed, not sleeping yet, not dreaming yet. Just still, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a notebook open but untouched. She listens, not for anything in particular, but the space around the sound. The house whispers, in the slow settling of beams. The faint tap of something not quite wind. In the warmth still clinging to rugs that haven't been walked today. It feels like a kind of breath. She leans forward. At her window, frost has begun to form delicate threads, thin, reaching, an unexpected lace where condensation once gathered. In the center of the glass, one warm place still holds clear. Round, soft-edged, the size of a paw. She doesn't touch it, she just looks. The moonlight crawls across the floor like it remembers where to go. She watches the way it moves, just a little, stretching over old grooves and careful corners. And then, she follows. Footsteps soft, slower now, no need for ritual, just memory doing what it does. The hallway sighs beneath her feet. When she reaches the stairs, she pauses. Not from hesitation but reverence. They're familiar. Each one knows her weight. Each one knows another's, too. She descends. In the sitting room, grandfather is asleep. Chair tilted just enough for drift. Hands resting like leaves folded over quiet. She doesn't wake him. Instead, she sits nearby. On the rug where Minna used to rest. The fire has faded to embers. The room is cloaked in slanting moonlight. There, the light catches on a shallow dip in the fabric, not recent. Not intentional, something worn into the weave by days and nights of stillness. A memory's outline. As she watches, a warmth settles in her chest. Not glow, not fire. Just the soft weight of belonging. She doesn't cry. She doesn't write. She just sits. The silence is full. Hours pass, or maybe only minutes, before she rises again and climbs the stairs with the steadiness of someone walking toward sleep. Back in her room, the moonlight has faded from the floor, curled now along the wall like the edge of a closing book. She slips into bed, pulls the blanket high. Outside, the wind touches the window once, then slips away. And in that moment, somewhere between night and nothing, she smiles, not because she saw anything, not because she heard, but because something in her whispered, "Still here."